What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Travis on Sports, the podcast where I, your host Travis Tyler, give my thoughts and discuss some of the latest sports news from the past week. We're a little late this week, but we're getting it done. We'll get it out by the end of the week here. And it could be a little shorter than usual also, but we'll see where that goes. Today is Thursday, May 26, 2022. We'll have the latest updates from the NHL and NBA playoffs. Some changes to some rules in college sports, including the scholarship limits of their football programs. The top prospect in Major League Baseball has been called up by the Baltimore Orioles and made his pro debut. A familiar NFL quarterback who is trying to make a bit of a comeback has made a positive impression, it seems, on a team. The Pittsburgh Steelers have announced their new GM. A couple key wide receiver transfers have picked their new schools. We'll talk a little bit about last week's PGA Championship. I didn't get to see the playoff. I'll get that out of the way right away. Had a prior commitment, had to leave as it seemed like Zalatoris was falling apart. So I can't really comment on what I saw in the playoff because I didn't see it. But we will talk about what happened a little bit there. Also, the number one overall pick in the USFL draft has been cut just about halfway through the season, a little more than halfway through the season. I believe there's 6 games in. And as always, we'll have much more. We're going to begin with the NBA and NHL playoffs since those are the most fluid, ever-changing situations right now. Anything else we have isn't going to change by the time we get this episode out, or by the time I get this episode recorded. So the NBA is in its conference finals right now, with Golden State and Dallas playing out west and Miami and Boston playing in the east. Golden State and Dallas tip off later tonight from California, with Golden State looking to eliminate the Mavs in 5 games. They currently lead 3-1, and Dallas was able to steal a win at home in Game 4 to survive. The Mavs also had a chance to win Game 2 as well, but they blew a double-digit lead in the second half. Obviously, the Mavs aren't a bad team. To me, this is just a case of the Warriors, especially with all their guys back, and with the guys that they've had develop into key contributors, the Warriors are a deeper and better team, and that's just, the fact of what we're looking at here. There's just too many advantages on that team. I mean, for the most part, Dallas's defense has been one of the big keys throughout this playoff run that they're on, and it's honestly been just about as good. In this series, they're just playing against better players. Those guys have been hard for the league to shut down for years, and now you got guys like Jordan Poole and Andrew Wiggins, and even Kevon Looney had a 20-point game the other night. Those are not guys that, Poole might be now, Wiggins sometimes. Those are not guys that you play in your game around. You know they're there and they're going to do something. But now that they've become offensive threats, they make the Warriors team a much deeper team, and they can go deeper into their bench to just have a new gear. Luka Doncic has been, without a doubt, one of the top scorers in the league. He's elite in every sense of the word when it comes offensively. This series, I think, has uncovered a flaw. You probably knew it was already there, but it's emphasized it a little bit just with Golden State's guards and wings, how quickly they move, how fast the ball moves in the Warriors' offense, and how quickly they make those decisions. He's a little bit limited defensively from a quickness and athletic standpoint. It's not that he's a bad athlete. He's not. He's a good athlete. You have to be a good NBA player for the most part, and you definitely have to be an elite NBA player. But there are limitations right now for him on defense that Golden State is using to their advantage. If you watch the games, you're having their guards go downhill and attack him at the rim and just get by him because they're quicker than he is. Obviously, he's one of the best players in the league. He's great at everything. It's just that one little facet that Golden State seems to have keyed in on to have him a little bit hesitant on one end of the floor. And the best players sometimes have things they can improve on as well. Not a knock, just an observation of what Golden State has been able to use to gain an advantage against the Mavericks. The Miami-Boston series has been one that's mostly been blowouts. There's been some final scores that look a lot closer than the games actually were, but in just about every game, a team has had at least a 20-point lead. In Game 1, Jimmy Butler scored 41, and the Heat outscored the Celtics by 25 in the third quarter. And then in Game 2, the Celtics came back, and they won that one by 25. So it's been both ways. Boston was finally able to win a second game in a row the other night and take a 3-2 lead, heading home to Boston for Game 6, which will be played tomorrow night. One of the key elements in the series is Miami's shooting, because they're a streaky team. They have good shooters, but their shooters run hot and cold, and if there's not a couple guys hot on the same night, then you'll get what you got in the last game, which was, shot a horrendous percentage from three-point range and got blown out. The statistics also show that Miami plays better when Bam Adebayo hits his double digits in this series. And obviously they've only won 2 games in this series, so it's a little smaller sample size here, but I feel like I keep hitting on him as an X factor in each one of their series that they're playing. And here against Boston, in their 2 wins, he had a 31-point game in the first one and a 10-point game in the second one. So going off of that, it seems safe to say that if Bam Adebayo scores at least 10 points, Miami at least has a chance, unless he's the only one that shows up and their shooters don't show up. That's when they're going to get blown out. On paper, these are 2 really balanced teams, but Miami isn't quite playing with the same, let's call it, togetherness as Boston is right now and has been since about the midway point in the season. It's an uphill climb for Miami already, and they may be without Tyler Hero once again, the NBA Sixth-Man of the Year on Friday night. The NHL playoffs have 7 teams left as Tampa eliminated top seed Florida in the East in a 4-game sweep. Tampa is the defending back-to-back champion and looking for the first three-peat in the NHL since the 1980s. I would like to give a little bit more of an analysis on this series, but the reality, and it's even simpler than the Dallas series that we talked about before. The reality was that Tampa had a deeper group of scoring forwards than Florida had, and they possibly have the best goalie in hockey right now, and by far the better goalie in that series, and Andrei Vasilevsky only allowed 3 goals that entire series and ended the round with a 49-save shutout in Game 4. Tampa will play either the New York Rangers or Carolina Hurricanes, who are playing right now and are tied 2 games apiece. Very interesting split if you look at it. Carolina won the first 2 games of this series at home in Raleigh, but then lost both the games that were up in New York. And going back to the last round, Carolina won all the games it played in Carolina and lost all the games they played that weren't in Carolina. So there's a trend forming here with Carolina winning at home and losing on the road, and these 2 teams are kind of playing into each other's hands here because the Rangers also look a lot more comfortable at home than on the road, which obviously makes sense. But, they're scoring like twice as many goals per game at home. Actually, going by this series, it's just over 3 times, almost 4 times, because they've scored only 2 goals in the games in Carolina, entering tonight, that is, and they scored 7 of them in the games in New York. So one of those teams is going to need to find a way to buck that trend and steal a game on the road. Otherwise, this series will predictably go 7 games, and if all those trends keep true, Carolina would have the home ice, and it would look like Carolina would be moving on to the Eastern Conference Finals. The Western Conference is now down to Calgary and Edmonton, and St. Louis and Colorado, which I think I mentioned these series last week as they were getting kicked off. The Calgary-Edmonton series has particularly been one of the more entertaining series in recent memory, and certainly this postseason. It started with a 15-goal game in Game 1 where Calgary won at home 9-6, and that seemed to light a fire under Edmonton as the Oilers have won all 3 of the games since then and have a chance to eliminate Calgary tonight. There have been plenty of goals scored in this series, so don't expect Calgary's offense to go down without a fight. Also, goalie Jacob Markstrom was a Vezina finalist this year as the league's top goalie, so he can't be happy with all the goals that Edmonton's been able to score, and he's going to come with his best efforts. But in his defense, there has been a lot of open ice for the Edmonton Oilers skaters to skate, and very little help from the Calgary defense. The Blues fought off elimination in overtime last night, with a overtime victory over the Colorado Avalanche in Colorado. Series now returns to St. Louis for Game 6 with Colorado ahead 3-2. The Avs have been the much better team for most of this series and even looked like the better team last night, regardless of how close that game ended up being. And St. Louis is now in a great position to tie this thing up, even though they really shouldn't be on home ice. St. Louis could grab momentum with a second straight win, but I still would think Colorado's the team that comes out on top here. In college, the NCAA has made some changes to its football scholarship allotments across the Division I level. At the FBS level, they will be waiving the initial counter limits of the 2022-2023 and 2023-2024 academic years, allowing schools to provide scholarships just based off of the total allotment of 85 scholarship players on the roster. Usually, brand new recruiting class is limited to 25 scholarships between high school players and transfer players, but now those teams will be basing it off of a total number of 85 scholarships. At the FCS level, which is just below all those big teams, which is the one that plays the games at Frisco, Texas for the championship, the ones at North Dakota State and Sam Houston State and James Madison, those teams that are involved in the scholarship limit there will be 63. And again, the normal limit is usually 25. It's being extended because of extended eligibility from numbers from COVID, with the players being allowed to play an extra year of college sports, and also so many people choosing to enter the transfer portal. There's become limited spaces available, so they're opening up more spaces and not just limiting each recruiting class to 25 recruits. The competition committee, or whatever the hell it's called these days, is also expected to monitor the transfer portal trends and activity before making any further determinations on if any other changes are needed. All of this is according to a report from The Athletic. A few conferences are also looking to get rid of divisions in football, and you really can't blame them. Previously, there were some restrictions that kind of promoted and encouraged divisions from the NCAA Division I Council, but now the council has relaxed those policies and changes should be expected quickly. Michigan State Athletic Director Alan Haller has already said in a press conference about a different athletic matter that there will definitely be changes in the Big Ten. And from the way he said it, it sounded like they may have already been agreed to, or at least been proposed, and it's just not announced. But that's just speculation on my part. No real intel there. The Pac-12 has already announced that this season's championship game will be between the two teams with the best records and not their division winners. Like I said, that all makes sense. All we really ask from each conference, other than hoping that our team gets into that championship game, but either way, you really usually have to have a good season. There are a few rare cases. All we ask is that it's a fair process that makes sense, and we get two teams, ideally the top two teams in the conference, but two teams that are going to be even enough to give us an entertaining game for the conference championship. And that hasn't been the case in some cases. You look at Michigan against Iowa last year. Michigan definitely deserved to be in there the way they played and making it to the playoff and everything. Iowa was not the second best team in the Big Ten. You could argue that Iowa was the sixth or seventh best team in the Big Ten, yet still made it to Indy to play Michigan and really didn't look like it belonged there. Most of the game, especially offensively, couldn't score points. And again, sticking with the Big Ten, in most years, 4 of the 5 best teams in the conference are in that East Division, and then either Iowa or Wisconsin, or in recent years even Northwestern every now and then has popped up and shows up as the delegate from the West. And Wisconsin's only one of those teams that has any Big Ten championships. And last season, you could argue that Michigan State, and Ohio State were the top 3 teams, with Michigan and Ohio State probably be in the top 2, and only one of those teams made it to Indy. And Michigan destroyed Iowa, who wasn't even close to as good as some of the other teams that could have been there. And we've seen this in the Pac-12 as well. Back in the 2011 and 2012 seasons, UCLA was like a 9-win team, 9-5, 9-4. They went 1 year over a top 10 Oregon team, and another year over a top 10 Stanford team, when both those teams were 11-1. And the ACC is also expected to remove the divisional format from its standings. Speaking of the ACC, there is a star wide receiver leaving the ACC, projected 2023 NFL first round draft